Welcome to episode 9 of The Evidence Room. Inside every investigation, the truth is hidden in the evidence. Tonight, we explore one of the most terrifying crime sprees in California history.
Yeah, and it's a heavy one.
It really is. I want you, the listener, to just imagine you're trying to sleep in California in the summer of 1985. Your front door is deadbolted, the windows are barred, you've got a newly purchased attack dog sleeping right at the foot of your bed, and a loaded revolver sitting on the nightstand.
Right.
And yet, as you just stare up at the ceiling, you know absolutely none of it matters, because the person terrorizing your state, he doesn't care about locks. He cuts through window screens, he slips through unlocked back doors, he strikes in the middle of the night, and he really doesn't care if you're a young woman, an elderly couple, or a whole family.
It was this very specific kind of psychological paralysis, because the ultimate illusion of safety, that idea that once you cross the threshold of your home, you are protected from the outside world, that was completely shattered.
Exactly. So today, this is our first deep dive into California, which is a state that has obviously been the setting for some of the most infamous criminal cases in the U.S. And we are looking at the hunt for Richard Ramirez, who became infamously known as the Night Stalker.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating here is looking at the underlying narrative. It wasn't just the sheer brutality of his crimes.
Right, it was this perfect storm. You have a deeply fragmented, broken mind colliding with a deeply fragmented, broken law enforcement system. And that collision allowed this reign of terror to persist from the spring of 1984 all the way to the late summer of 1985.
Which is a remarkably long time for someone to operate like this.
It is. So we're going to break down the origins of his pathology, the systemic failures that basically hid him in plain sight, the forensic science that finally caught him, and the incredible civilian capture that ended the whole nightmare.
And framing it that way is crucial, because to understand how he operated as a ghost for so long, we first have to understand the actual mechanics of how this specific monster was built.
So let's look at that blueprint. The story starts with Ricardo Leyva Munoz Ramirez. He was born in El Paso, Texas on February 29, 1960, a leap year baby.
Right.
But right out of the gate, we aren't just looking at a difficult childhood, are we? We are looking at severe, documented neurological trauma.
Yeah, and that physical trauma is really the foundational piece of this entire puzzle. So at just 5 years old, Ramirez was struck in the head by a heavy park swing, which completely knocked him unconscious.
Wow.
And this wasn't, a minor childhood scrape. This was a severe traumatic brain injury, and it led directly to him developing temporal lobe epilepsy.
Stop right there for a second, because I want to make sure we really understand the mechanism of that.
Yeah.
Is head trauma at age 5 really enough to set someone on a path to becoming a serial killer?
Well, not on its own, no. Obviously, lots of people have brain injuries and don't commit crimes, but we have to look at what the temporal lobes actually do.
Right.
They are heavily involved in emotional regulation, in processing memory, and crucially, impulse control. So when you introduce a really significant structural injury to that exact area of the brain right during a critical window of early childhood development, you are drastically altering the biological hardware. You're basically compromising the brain's ability to pump the brakes on aggressive or erratic impulses.
I see. So the hardware is damaged. But the environment he was raised in wasn't exactly designed to help him heal either.
Oh, far from it. I mean, his father was a violently alcoholic man who subjected the entire family to just relentless physical abuse.
Yeah.
And it actually crossed the line from physical abuse into deep psychological torture. As a punishment, his father would take a young Ramirez to a local cemetery and literally tie him to a crucifix overnight.
Which is just unimaginable. You're a child, you already have this compromised neurological hardware, and your primary caregiver is tying you to a grave marker in the dark.
Yeah.
So naturally, he looks for a safe harbor. He seeks out a protector. And the person a 12-year-old Ramirez chooses is his older cousin, Miguel.
And this right here is where the hardware damage meets a truly devastating software installation.
That's a great way to put it.
Because Miguel, or Mike, he was a Green Beret who had recently come back from the Vietnam War, and he suffered from severe PTSD and schizophrenia. But Miguel didn't come home and share, typical war stories with his little cousin.
Right.
He actively boasted about committing gruesome, sadistic war crimes.
And he didn't just tell stories, he had actual photographic evidence.
He did. He showed a young, highly impressionable Richard these Polaroid photographs of Vietnamese women that he had raped, tortured, mutilated, and murdered.
So horrific stuff.
Images of women tied to trees and decapitated. Now, think about it. A neurotypical child with a safe, loving home life would be profoundly traumatized and repulsed by this.
Of course.
But Ramirez, with his compromised brain and his abusive home, he was fascinated. Miguel basically became this dark mentor to him. He even taught Ramirez military stealth tactics, specifically how to move silently and enter structures undetected.
Which is chilling when you think about what comes later. And this all brings us to the ultimate point of no return. Ramirez is 15 years old. He's physically present in the room when Miguel gets into a vicious domestic argument with his wife, Jessie.
Yeah.
And right there, right in front of a teenage Ramirez, Miguel pulls out a gun and shoots his own wife in the face.
It's just horrific, and Miguel is later found not guilty by reason of insanity for that. But for Ramirez, that moment, that's when the empathy is permanently deleted.
Which makes me wonder, was Ramirez a ticking time bomb anyway, or did Miguel actually build the bomb? It feels like pouring gasoline on a spark.
Well, the forensic psychiatrist, Dr. Michael Stone, actually extensively studied this exact sequence of events, and his analysis is super fascinating. He proposes this concept of the made psychopath versus the born psychopath.
Meaning Ramirez wasn't genetically predestined to do this.
Precisely. Dr. Stone argues that Ramirez developed a schizoid personality disorder that was the direct result of this perfect storm.
Right, the hardware and the software.
Exactly. You have the early brain damage and the epilepsy. Then you introduce this extreme, normalized exposure to graphic sexual violence and murder through a trusted mentor figure. The hardware of his brain was already cracked, and the software installed by Miguel just shattered whatever tiny capacity for human empathy he had left.
So by the time Ramirez leaves Texas and drifts to California in 1982, he is essentially a fully formed weapon.
Yes, he is.
He's 22 years old, he's developed a severe cocaine addiction, and he's funding it through petty burglaries in Los Angeles and San Francisco. But then, those burglaries start to mutate.
They do, and it's really important to clarify the timeline here, because for decades, the public record of his escalation was actually wrong.
Right, because the actual first strike was completely hidden until the DNA caught up.
Exactly. It wasn't until 2009 that forensic science linked Ramirez to his true first known murder.
Wow.
In April 1984, up in the Tenderloin district of San Francisco, he lured a 9-year-old girl named Mei Lung into the basement of her apartment building, and he sexually assaulted and murdered her there.
Just absolutely sickening.
It is, and this chilling discovery, it totally recontextualized his criminal history. It proved that he was capable of the absolute extremes of depravity long before the recognized Night Stalker pattern actually began.
Because that recognized pattern doesn't emerge until 2 months later, in June 1984. He breaks into an apartment in Glassell Park down in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
He attacks 79-year-old Jenny Vinkow in her sleep, stabbing her so viciously that she is nearly decapitated.
Yeah.
But he makes a mistake. He leaves a fingerprint on the window screen that he removed to get inside.
And this is where the second half of our theme really comes into play, that fragmented law enforcement system.
Yeah, so I want to dig into this.
Right.
Because Ramirez was already in the system at this point, right? He had arrests for auto theft and drug possession.
Yeah.
So if he leaves a clear fingerprint at a brutal murder scene, why isn't an algorithm somewhere immediately flagging him? Why doesn't a red light go off?
Because in 1984, that algorithm simply did not exist. And this is honestly one of the hardest things for modern minds to grasp about 1980s policing. The police departments back then operated in almost complete, impenetrable silos.
How bad were these silos, like mechanically speaking?
Mechanically. It meant that fingerprints were literally physical ink on paper index cards.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So if the LAPD found a fingerprint in Glassell Park, they had to manually, visually compare it against their specific local physical files.
That's crazy.
And the San Francisco Police Department, they had their own separate room of physical cards. There was no digital network connecting them. Finding a suspect wasn't just looking for a needle in a haystack. It was like trying to find a specific needle while 10 different farmers completely refused to share their half of the hay.
That analogy makes so much sense. So he could commit a burglary in LA, steal a car, drive up the I-5 to San Francisco, commit a murder, and drive back. And to the police, he was just a ghost.
Exactly.
Because a stolen car report in one jurisdiction wasn't talking to a homicide desk in another.
Precisely. And because he was operating in this massive systemic blind spot, the violence was just allowed to escalate entirely unchecked.
And it absolutely explodes in March 1985. I mean, in a single day, March 17th, he attacks Maria Hernandez. And she miraculously survives because a bullet literally ricochets off the car keys she holds up to her face.
Just incredible luck.
Unbelievable. But he still gets inside her house and instantly kills her roommate, Dale Okazaki.
Yeah.
And then, within the hour, he pulls Silene Yu from her car and shoots her dead.
The media starts calling him the Valley Intruder and the walk-in killer. But the sheer brutality of his next attack is what truly cements the terror of his campaign.
You're talking about Vincent and Maxine Zazara.
Yes. Just a few days later, he breaks into their home in Whittier. He shoots Vincent in the head while he sleeps. But what he does to Maxine shows the full manifestation of that pathology we discussed earlier.
Yeah.
After shooting her, he retrieves a carving knife, mutilates her body, and literally gouges out her eyes to take home in a jewelry box as a souvenir.
It's a level of sadism that is just hard to process. And what's wild is that, unlike most serial killers, he didn't have a specific type.
No, he didn't.
Usually they follow a pretty rigid profile,
Yeah.
A specific demographic, a specific weapon. Ramirez was completely chaotic, like a tornado.
And that chaos is exactly what made him so terrifying. He operated like a mutating pathogen. He used handguns, a machete, tire irons, a claw hammer.
Just whatever he could find or wanted to use that day.
Exactly. He murdered Bill Doy and assaulted his disabled wife, Lillian. He attacked 83-year-old Mabel Bell and her 81-year-old sister, Florence Lang, bludgeoning them and then using lipstick to draw a satanic pentagram on the wall and on Bell's thigh.
Which, the Satanism aspect is just so bizarre. He would break in, wake these terrified people up, and force them to, quote, swear on Satan.
Right.
He did this to Inez Erickson after shooting her fiancé. It was this calculated campaign of psychological torture. And if we look at the macro effect of that, it totally explains the absolute hysteria gripping California at the time.
The public reaction was completely unprecedented, and it was driven by the psychological mechanism of his randomness.
How so?
Well, when a killer targets a specific demographic, the rest of the public can construct this false sense of security, right? They think, well, I'm not his type, so I'm safe.
Oh, that makes perfect sense.
Right. But Ramirez removed that defense mechanism. He attacked men, women, children, the elderly. He struck in wealthy neighborhoods and poor ones. No one was safe.
Which is why people completely altered their lives. Gun sales went through the roof.
Yeah.
People who had never even touched a firearm were suddenly sleeping with them under their pillows.
Yeah.
Locksmiths were working around the clock, installing deadbolts and window bars. Hardware stores completely sold out of locks, and people were just buying up attack dogs left and right.
Meanwhile, the newly formed LAPD task force is completely drowning. I mean, they're dealing with unprecedented public anxiety. Politicians are breathing down their necks, demanding immediate results.
Right.
And they are chasing a killer who leaves behind incredibly chaotic, bloody crime scenes, but very few concrete, actionable leads.
Until they get their first real break, and it all comes down to a shoe print.
Yes, lead detectives Frank Salerno and Gil Carrillo. At multiple crime scenes, including the horrific murder of Peter Pan and the assault on his wife Barbara up in San Francisco, they isolate a very distinct shoe print in the dirt outside the homes.
And this isn't just any generic sneaker footprint. The detectives managed to track the specific tread pattern to an Avia sneaker, a men's size 11.5.
And here's where the detective work becomes incredibly precise.
Yeah.
They actually contact the manufacturer and learn that this specific shoe, in that specific size and colorway, is exceptionally rare.
How rare?
Only 6 pairs exist in the entire country.
Wow.
5 of them went to Arizona. Only 1 single pair was shipped to a store in Los Angeles.
That is an unbelievable piece of investigative work, so they know exactly what the killer is wearing. But a shoe print in the dirt doesn't give you a name or a face.
No, it doesn't.
What actually breaks this case wide open is a 13-year-old kid with just remarkable situational awareness.
James Ramirez Jr.
Yes. Let's set the scene for this because it is incredibly cinematic. It's late August 1985. Ramirez travels down to Mission Viejo, and he's stalking a neighborhood in the middle of the night. 13-year-old James Romero is awake, and he hears footsteps outside.
And most kids would hide under the covers.
Exactly. But James looks out his window. He sees a man lurking in the shadows. The man gets spooked by something and runs off.
But James doesn't just watch him leave. He actively pursues the information.
Yes. He runs outside and watches an orange Toyota speeding away. And he locks in the color, the make, and most importantly, a partial license plate number. He tells his parents, they call the police, and suddenly that massive haystack gets a lot smaller. The cops finally have a vehicle to look for.
And 4 days later, they find it. That stolen orange Toyota is found abandoned in Los Angeles. Now, Ramirez had meticulously wiped the interior down to remove his fingerprints, but he missed one spot. Police managed to pull a single usable fingerprint right off the rearview mirror.
Okay, wait, I have to push back here based on what we just talked about. We established that in 1985, a single fingerprint is essentially useless if it's just a piece of paper in a room of 10 million other pieces of paper.
Right.
So how does pulling this one print suddenly identify him?
Because the timing was a near miracle. The LAPD had literally just installed a brand new cutting-edge technology. It was called AFIS, the Automated Fingerprint Identification System. It was the very first computerized database of its kind in the entire region.
Okay, but it wasn't fully populated yet.
Exactly. Digitizing millions of physical index cards takes years and years of manual data entry. So to start the system off, the LAPD only entered the fingerprints of individuals who were born after January 1st, 1960.
Oh, wow. And Ramirez's birthday.
February 29th, 1960.
Unbelievable.
He made the digital cutoff by a matter of weeks. So they scanned the print from that rearview mirror into this new computer system, and instead of taking months of manual searching, the machine chugged away and spat out a match. Richard Ramirez, a 25-year-old drifter from Texas with a mugshot from a 1984 auto theft.
That is the definition of a systemic breakthrough. They finally have a name and a face. But then an unbelievable political blunder almost destroys the entire investigation.
The Dianne Feinstein leak.
Yes, the police have the shoe print, they have the ballistics, they're quietly building this airtight case, and then San Francisco Mayor Dianne Feinstein holds a televised press conference and just broadcasts all the classified forensic details right to the public.
Yeah, she reveals the exact caliber of the weapon and the exact make and size of those Avius sneakers.
Which is just, I mean, you can imagine the fury of the task force.
Oh, absolutely. Revealing the specific mechanics of your physical evidence is the cardinal sin of an ongoing investigation. And they knew Ramirez was obsessively consuming media coverage of his own crimes.
Right. And of course, Ramirez is watching TV, hears the mayor detail the only physical evidence connecting him to the scenes, and what does he do? He immediately walks to the Golden Gate Bridge and drops those incredibly rare Avius sneakers right into the bay.
He completely destroys the physical link.
It's infuriating, but the police still have his identity. So on August 29th, 1985, they release his 1984 mugshot to the media. The net is closing, but Ramirez is completely unaware of it.
Because he's on a bus.
Right. He takes a trip out to Tucson, Arizona to visit his brother. He has absolutely no idea that his face is currently plastered on the front page of every newspaper and leading every single television broadcast in California.
And his brother isn't even home, so he turns around and takes the bus right back to Los Angeles. He arrives on the morning of August 31st.
And he walks right past police officers who are actively staking out the bus terminal.
Yeah, the irony's crazy.
He just wanders into a convenience store in East LA. And as he's standing there, he notices a group of elderly Hispanic women looking at him in absolute terror. They're whispering, "El Matador, the killer." So he glances down at the newsstand.
And he sees his own face staring back at him. From the front page of Lay Opinion, under this massive headline, Invasor Nocturno Night Invader.
He completely panics. He sprints out of the store, and he essentially runs into the absolute worst possible neighborhood for a predator.
Oh, yeah.
He tries to carjack an unlocked Ford Mustang.
But the community, which has been paralyzed by fear for months, they finally snap back. Two residents, Faustino Pina and Jose Burgoyne, literally drag him out of the car.
Wow.
Ramirez breaks free, runs across the street, and tries to steal keys from a woman named Angelina De La Torre. Her husband, Manuel, grabs a piece of a metal fence post and strikes Ramirez over the head.
And it's not just these three guys. It turns into a mob of over 10 residents chasing the Night Stalker down Hubbard Street. They catch him, they restrain him, and they beat him mercilessly.
Yeah, they recognized his rotting teeth from the news reports. This was the sudden, explosive release of months of pent-up statewide terror.
So when the police finally arrive, responding to what they thought was just a routine disturbance call, they find the most feared man in America bleeding out on the pavement.
And Ramirez was actively grateful when the officers put him in handcuffs. The police literally saved his life from that mob.
It's like a horror movie villain taking a wrong turn into a neighborhood that fights back. So he's arrested, and the trial that follows is just a $1.8 million circus.
It was the most expensive murder trial in California history at the time, and Ramirez absolutely used the courtroom as a stage. He drew a pentagram on his hand, flashed it to the cameras, and yelled, "Hail Satan!"
And the terror didn't magically stop just because he was behind bars either.
No, it didn't.
There was sheer panic among the jury. At one point, a juror named Phyllis Singletary didn't show up for court because she was found murdered in her apartment.
And the rest of the jury was terrified. They were convinced Ramirez was orchestrating hits from his cell. Now, it was later determined she was tragically killed by her boyfriend in a domestic dispute. It was completely unrelated to the case, but it just shows the suffocating atmosphere of fear that he still commanded.
Finally, though, on September 20, 1989, he's convicted of 43 charges, including 13 counts of murder, and he's sentenced to the gas chamber. Do you remember his reaction to the sentence?
Oh, yeah. He tells reporters, "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland."
Which is just a chilling demonstration of that completely shattered empathy we discussed at the very beginning. But here's the part of the story I really need us to analyze, because it totally defies logic. How does a monster who mutilates women and gouges out their eyes receive bags of fan mail from women while he's on death row?
It's bizarre, but it's actually a documented phenomenon called hybristophilia. It's a sexual interest in and attraction to those who commit crimes.
Right.
But in this specific case, we really have to look at the mechanism of the media spectacle. The intense, daily, sensationalized coverage essentially divorced the man from the brutal reality of his actions.
Like he was just a character on TV to them.
Exactly. To these groupies, the victims became abstract, and Ramirez became this dark, edgy celebrity. It's about adjacency to perceived power without actually being in any real danger, since he was securely locked away. In 1996, he actually married one of his supporters, Doreen Leoy, who had written him over 75 letters.
That is just a deeply disturbing psychological footnote to an already horrific case. He never actually made it to the gas chamber, though, did he?
No, he didn't. The California appeals process essentially outlasted him. Ramirez died of complications from B-cell lymphoma in 2013 at the age of 53 while he was housed at San Quentin.
So, looking at everything we've discussed, the legacy of this case really seems to be that it forced an evolution. It forced the system to change.
Absolutely. The Night Stalker case fundamentally changed how law enforcement operates in California. It completely destroyed those silos we talked about. It proved that massive agencies had to create joint task forces and actually communicate across city lines.
Right.
And it proved the absolute necessity of fully funded, digitized fingerprint databases like AFIS. The system adapted because the failure to adapt had cost so many lives.
We started this deep dive by looking at a boy whose brain hardware was severely damaged and whose software was overwritten by a horrific role model. And as we wrap up this look into his life and crimes, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, lingering question to ponder.
Okay.
Considering Ramirez's highly theatrical courtroom antics, the drawn-on pentagrams, the dramatic quotes to the press, and his history of absorbing his cousin's war stories, how much of his satanic persona was a genuine dark faith? And how much was simply a calculated performative mask designed by a broken mind to maximize the terror of his victims and ensure the absolute obsession of the media?
That is a chilling thought. The monster intentionally playing the role of a monster.
It really is. Thanks for listening to The Evidence Room. If you enjoyed this episode, like and subscribe for more true crime investigations from around the world. Remember, some cases remain unsolved, but the evidence always tells a story.